Weekend, the ANC leader, President Cyril Ramaphosa, again defending the party's practice of cadre deployment. Last week, the DA lost a court case where they tried to have cadre deployment declared unconstitutional. But they have won another case that led to the ANC being forced to publish the records of its cadre deployment meetings. At the same time, Ramaphosa again promising the ANC will only deploy leaders free of corruption to represent it in Parliament and provincial legislatures. Natasha Marrian is the acting editor at Financial Mail. Natasha, good afternoon to you. So we see the ANC strongly defending cadre deployment, and that's no surprise. Can the ANC say to voters that cadre deployment is not responsible for corruption, for some of the things we saw during state capture, for example?
You know, it is a difficult argument for the ANC to make, Stephen. We know that even the then chairperson of the State Capture Commission raised issues with cadre deployment. That was the current Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo. But the ANC has penned a document to all its structures and to explain to the electorate and to its members where it describes the DA as gaslighting the cadre deployment policy as a smokescreen in a bid to reverse transformation, its transformation agenda. So the ANC, as it talks to its structures, as it talks to the electorate, has put together this response to this question about cadre deployment, saying that it's a ploy by the DA to reverse the transformation agenda in the country. And, you know, it's a difficult argument for the ANC to make because we saw what happened under state capture. But that seems to be, at least, you know, judging from the internal communication that's been going around, that seems to be the narrative that the ANC is trying to push to justify its continued use of cadre deployment.
I mean, voters are obviously going to have their own views, and as you point out, the courts have said cadre deployment can continue. Is this going to be an election issue? I mean, are the two becoming conflated, rightly or wrongly? I mean, there's an argument to say cadre deployment's got nothing to do with corruption. But is there a risk for some of the political parties here that these issues sort of become conflated in some way and cadre deployment then becomes an issue?
You know, Stephen, there are so many issues for the electorate in this election. I think for the chattering classes, for the middle class, it will definitely be a talking point. You know, we're discussing it all the time. The DA is releasing some more information on the way forward tomorrow. But I think for South Africans and the majority of the electorate, there are very, very crucial issues like unemployment, like crime, like you know that they're grappling with, like the provision of water. So I think this is an important issue, but I don't think it will be as big an electoral issue as our unemployment crisis or indeed the crime crisis in the country. However, Stephen, also the difficulty that parties are going to have is to get locked up in this narrative around cadre deployment and ignore everything else, that's quite urgent to the electorate.
It's interesting because, I mean, one of the ways to win an election is to talk about what people are thinking about and talking about. And the DA's been able to push that issue of cadre deployment. You're suggesting they may not get much benefit from it?
It's instinctively, I would say no, Stephen. You know, the problem is, the DA has turned the cadre deployment issue into one that's linked to state capture and corruption at a national level. But the real problem, a fundamental problem with cadre deployment, and there's ample academic research to illustrate this, is actually at local government level, where municipal managers are deployed by party structures, even though they are not qualified for those positions. That is where it really hits home. And a focus at that level may have benefited the DA a lot more than this national focus. Let's look at Brian Molefe, for instance. Brian Molefe, he's at the center of state capture. He's on trial for corruption at Transnet. But he's highly qualified. Machela Koko, again, highly qualified. So I think the focus on cadre deployment at a national level, may run amiss with the electorate for the DA. I think a more local focus would have hit home a lot more hard, where communities are seeing those ramifications every day in the delivery of services.
You talk about things like water provision and unemployment, and these are huge issues. And I mean, from 2009, and maybe even before then, but certainly to my memory, from 2009, the ANC has been promising to grow the number of jobs to ensure, to enable the creation of more jobs in the country. And it doesn't seem to have happened. And I realize if you look at the nature of our society, the inequality, the education, those problems that we have, growing the number of jobs is very difficult. But when the ANC now says it will create 2.5, 3.5 million jobs, do you think voters believe that?
I think the 2.5 million job opportunities is another red herring that we've seen, Stephen, when we've covered elections in 2019, in 2014, in election after election, there's these job promises, but the ANC never does the structural work to reform the economy, and that's where the problem lies. And if it doesn't have the political will, which I haven't seen in so many election cycles, the problem is going to persist and it's not going to change.
The other issue that sort of comes back to this is that the ANC keeps saying that none of its leaders implicated in corruption will be in parliament or provincial legislatures after the election. And yet we know that many of them, I think the figure is 95 of them, have had findings against them and have not been, the last time we heard, had not been to the ANC's Integrity Committee. Is it possible to know what's happening behind the scenes, to sort of lift the veil on this a bit, with the ANC's list process? If in fact that is going to include some of these people, that the parliamentary lists are going to include some people who have findings against them.
Stephen, I had an interview on that very issue today. And yes, the Integrity Committee, as well as the Electoral Commission of the ANC, according to David Makura, who I'm going to quote in my story that's coming out on Thursday, are going to be interviewing everyone who's going to be a candidate for as an MP or an MPL in the upcoming election. The problem, Stephen, with the Integrity Committee is it's not a disciplinary committee. It can make a recommendation to the NEC, but it's not the final arbiter on that matter. So even if the Integrity Committee could arguably say that, for example, Azizi Kodwa shouldn't be on the list, it's still a decision that the ANC NEC can overturn. So we're going to have a very direct and open and transparent view into the ANC's thinking on this matter. If those people do appear on their lists, we will know that this is lip service and that all the talk about reform and renewal means little in the grand scheme of things, where it doesn't put its money where its mouth is.
The ANC's policies, if you look at their manifesto, I mean, many of them are sort of things that have been repeated. Many of them are things that are being implemented and are being repeated. You would sort of expect that to an extent. Is there anything new that we really have never seen before? I mean, some of the things around sort of, the ANC will continue to use legislation around expropriation, for example. Nothing really new there. Again, I see the sort of fuss from the investment industry about possibly using prescribed assets. That's been said before, hasn't really happened. Is there anything new in this manifesto?
Not that I've seen, Stephen, not that I've seen in the manifesto. For me, the emphasis in the manifesto on implementation this time around was a lot more significant than the contents. But again, the ANC keeps emphasizing that it will begin implementing its policies more aggressively. But we've seen that not happen in the past. The last administration, the sixth administration, which is ending now, has been fixated on repairing the damage from the fifth administration, and then suffered many roadblocks on the way, like COVID, like the July unrest, like the floods. And the next administration is likely to continue that repair job from that fifth administration, which was so debilitating for South Africa. But the ANC's room to maneuver in implementing its agenda and its policies is also it's shrinking. If the ANC declines in support in the upcoming election and has to go into a coalition, its ability to implement its agenda fully will become diluted, and in future elections as well. So the ANC is really running out of room to implement its vision. It's left it for so long, for so many election cycles, and I'm just concerned that this will be another one of those.
Natasha Marrian, thank you. Acting editor and columnist at Financial Mail. Really appreciate the time. We'll stay